Hey, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. I think I'm registering on the microphone now. So for those of you, so I was just on for like an hour and went through my whole little spiel. And then I looked down at the chat and somebody uh, was like, I can't hear you because I didn't have my microphone on. So for those of you who are out there and are insisting that I am not an INFJ, I don't know what says TE polar more than sitting here and talking for an hour without my microphone on and not even realizing it. Thank you for to the guy who pointed out the microphone wasn't working, but hey, TE polar. Um, okay. So this video, I'm going to try it again, and hopefully the mic's working. I'm at least seeing something registering down there. Okay. Um, let's see here. Now I'm like all paranoid about it, so I want to just double check. Bear with me. Okay, we're cool. All right, so this again is going to be a stream on what pisses off the various personality types. Things like your microphone not being on. So this is based on, I'm giving credit to talking with famous people. Those of you who are familiar, host Eric posted a video a while ago. I stumbled across it not too long ago, and he was talking about what frustrates the various types based off of where their cognitive functions are. And I decided I wanted to sort of riff on that. I wish I could find the video, but I can't. He posts so many videos. I couldn't find the one that I saw. I apologize. If I do find it, I'll link it below. But his point was, if you really want to know what frustrates, any of the personality types, look at what their seventh function and their eighth function are. And if they're forced into a situation where they have to engage those two functions, their seventh function and eighth function, that's going to lead to all kinds of frustration. Now, the things I'm going to talk about probably frustrate everybody and they frustrate every personality type, but they have a special place in hell for certain personality types and they really hit them in the gut. And the reasoning behind it is because if you think about it, you're used to using your dominant function and your second function primarily. And when you're forced into a situation where you have to use, basically the opposite of those functions, and it's working against you, right? And you're trying to use your first function and your second function to accomplish whatever goal you're after, but you're forced into a situation where you have to use the other functions and you can't get what you want done. That is, just like the quintessential frustration for all the types. And we'll go through each of them and talk about them. So for the INFJ, one of the motivations that why I wanted to do this video is because I recently was in one of these situations where I was forced into a absolutely strict SITE quandary, right? And I like to refer to it as hyper bureaucracy. And we all hate bureaucracy. I understand that. But hyper bureaucracy has a special place in hell, like I said, for INFJs and ENFJs, because you're forced into this universe where you have to use SI and TE and you can't accomplish whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. When if you were allowed to use your first two functions, everything would be fine, right? So here's the situation. I'm at a gas station and I'm buying something that I had to show ID for. I don't know what the YouTube rules are here, but it was something you had to show ID for, right? To prove your age. And um, but the problem is my driver's license had expired because I had recently had a birthday, and being sort of TE polar, hadn't really thought about the fact that I need to go and actually renew my license. So I didn't realize that it was expired until I'm trying to buy what I'm trying to buy. The clerk asks for my ID, give it to her, and she scans it, and she's like, "Oh, your license is expired." And I'm like, "Well, I'm clearly old enough, right, to buy this. So can you just punch in my birthday because it's right there in the license?" No, we can't do that. Well, I know they could, but she refused to do it, right? So I'm forced into this hyper bureaucracy, right, where she's got to follow whatever rules they have set up for, you know, verifying somebody's age. Now, the reason that it was even more frustrating, and I understand that would be frustrating for everybody, but the reason that it's especially frustrating for an INFJ is because you are denying the absolute truth of the issue, right? In favor for these stupid SITE rules, right? Like everybody knew that I was old enough to buy, like just looking at me, you know that I'm old enough, right? Just use your NI, right? Like that I'm old enough. And then you couple that with the fact that, you know, I couldn't use my FE to get out of the situation or to accomplish what I was trying to accomplish because she put up that brick wall, right? That TESI brick wall that, we got to just follow the rules. And I'm sorry, even though it's a inconvenience to you, and even though we're denying the truth of the matter, we've got this bureaucratic system that is, you know, just completely ineffective or like counterproductive, right? Like it's denying the fundamental truth. And that is the most frustrating thing for an INFJ, and I'd argue an ENFJ, is when the SITE rules, like this is the way things are done, the bureaucracy, completely contradict reality, right? Like what we all know using our NI. And then on top of that, your FE is rendered completely useless, right? Like there was no charming, there was no like building a rapport with this person and sweet talking, or like FE was just not going to work. It's like the computer won't read it, and sorry, even though I know she could have typed in the numbers, but whatever. Okay, so that is the type of thing that's going to grind an INFJ's gears. And I've known another INFJ, and she was like, just typical INFJ, just sweetest person, always avoided conflict, that type. Um, and the only time I ever saw her like get into a blinding rage was when she was trying to return something at some department store, and they wouldn't take it because she had bought it at another location or something, very dumb and bureaucratic like that, where like your NI is like, look, it's obvious, that I bought it. I've got the receipt, just put the money back on my card. But their bureaucracy was just saying no, and there was just no way of using your FE or your NI to convince the person otherwise. Very, very frustrating. Okay. ENFJ, they're going to have the same issue, because, they're not TE polar, but they've got TE down there in the A slot, and they've got SI, they're SI polar. And so they're not going to see, what the benefit of these rules are, right? They're just like, in the same way that with the INFJ, there's like, it's obvious, what's going on here. Why are you letting this bureaucracy prevent us from doing what we both want to do? You want to sell me something, I want to buy it. What's the problem? Okay, so with the J function, the J personality types, so the judgers, um, their frustration is going to be similar, where it's sort of like it's a problem with the knowledge base, right? Where there's sort of a disconnect with how they what they know and what they know about the world, and now the world is pushing back on them and saying no, 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 right? So let's talk about some other examples. With the ESTJ and ISTJ, their seventh and eighth functions are going to be either extroverted feeling and introverted, um, yeah, introverted intuition, right? So the seventh and eighth function are again going to be sort of the opposite of what your first two functions are. So instead of introverted sensing, they have to use introverted intuition, and instead of extroverted thinking, they have to use extroverted feeling, right? So their frustration is going to come when they're trying to interact socially. They're trying to navigate through the social world, which is what FE is doing. But they have to rely on basically new information or some sort of NI type of information as opposed to their SI, you know, normal experience, like their normal way of doing things. So the example that I could think of is, you get a lot of ISTJs and ESTJs in management at large companies because, they're awesome at process and they understand how things are done. And so they sort of rise quickly into leadership roles. Um, and usually they've got no problem because, the way most institutions and most jobs are set up, people just kind of do what they're told to do, right? Um, as part of their job. And there's sort of this institutional way of doing things, kind of an SI type rule based system. And they're used to being able to just say, look, if you're working for me, you're going to show up at 9 o'clock every day. You're going to take a lunch break, and then you're going to go home at 5 or 6, take the train or drive home. And that's just the way things are done. This very regimented show up on time, do your work, and then go home, and then do the whole thing the next day. But things are very different now with the Gen Z generation that's starting to enter into the workforce. And a lot of it is because I would argue, my little NI theory is, they are the first generation where everything is sort of done on their own time, right? If you want to watch a movie, you just pull it up on Netflix or YouTube or whatever and watch the movie at your own convenience. If you want to listen to a song, you pull it up on YouTube. If you want to read a book, just download it on your Amazon Kindle or whatever. But the world is available to them, when they want it, right? And so they don't have that sort of scheduled, regimented mentality that those of us who are older grew up with, right? Like if we wanted to watch a TV show, we had to be in front of the TV at 7:30 on a Thursday night, right? Either that or we missed it, or we'd have to record it on our VCR or whatever. But we were, just sort of used to things being regimented and scheduled. But now, you know, um, people don't need to go into the office to do their work. They can do their work on their laptop at home or at the coffee shop. A lot of work these days can be done on the phone. And, you know, they don't need to be in the office from 9 to 5, right? Um, and not only that, but, they'll kind of just sort of do work, they'll meet the deadline, but they'll sort of do it on their own time, right? So if they're the type that likes to work during the night, they'll work during the night. If they like to wait until the weekend and just pile everything until the weekend and do it over the weekend, they'll do that. but they'll, kind of just do it on their own time. And it's just a cultural generational thing, right? It's not that they're lazy and don't want to do the work. It's just the way that they interact with the world is so much different, right? Like, again, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, you couldn't, if you had to mail something, you couldn't just attach it to an email and send it off. You had to literally sit in your office and wait for the mailman or the FedEx person to show up and print it out, and God forbid, type it, and all that kind of stuff. And so it's just a very, very different environment and a very different world. So going back to what frustrates people is, if they're trying to get people to sort of do things the way that things were always done, so the ESTJ or the ISTJ is trying to use their FE to engage with people and get them to do things. And the old way of doing things just doesn't apply anymore. It doesn't work anymore. Now they have to use their NI to sort of, understand what the difference is, right? They have to, the generational differences and the way that people sort of operate, or younger generations operate, is a very NI thing, right? Like the ability to understand that, right? Um, Now, if somebody wrote a book or something and explained it, then maybe they'll get it, right? Because then it sort of gets into their SI slot. But just sort of fundamentally understanding that there's a fundamental, difference in the essence of the way people work. Again, it's a very NI thing, and so it gets very frustrating when they can't get people to do what they're supposed to be doing, right? Um, and they don't understand why these people are doing things differently, and they're doing it different than normal. So it's almost the opposite of the INFJ frustration, where we get pissed off when people insist on, doing it, the tried and true rule based way, when we know like that's totally pointless and counterproductive. The ESTJ, ISTJ are sort of the flip of that, where they want everybody to sort of do it the way that things have always been done. And once things change, now all of a sudden they have to use their NI to understand what the difference is. And that can be frustrating. Um, okay. So now let's move on to the ESFJs and ISFJs. So similar thing, where they're used to the world operating in a particular way, but instead of having to deal with people in the FE world, they have to deal with things or new objects or new systems, a new way of doing things, that is not in the social domain. And so, for example, if you're if you're in the workforce and you are in like an office setting, and they change the phone system or the computer system, and not just by like a little, but like qualitatively different, right? Like they go from an old phone system where it's just sort of the standard phone, to now a phone system where everything's on your computer, and the messages are on your computer instead of the phone. Watch all the ISFJs freak out when they put this new system in, right? Um, because they're so used to, TE things working a particular way, and now all of a sudden, they have to learn, not just sort of new rules or, new buttons to press, but an entirely new concept, that, this system is different now. um I also think of an example, 5-10 years ago, there was this huge explosion over social media when a bunch of schools, like, grade schools, started teaching what they called core math. And those of you who are younger might have actually had to go through this. Um, and they basically changed the way that you do math, right? And so those of us, you know, who were parents at the time, we're used, if you're adding 310 plus 265, you put them up, you do the ones, you carry over, you do the tens, you carry over, you do the hundred. Like that's how you did math, and that's how people did math for hundreds of years, right? Very, very SITE kind of thing, right? It's not like there's no TI there. It's just plug and chug. Like, this is how you do addition. Here, this is how you do subtraction. And then they changed the rules. And they were like, they wanted people to do it this core way, and I can't even explain how that's done. But it changed sort of the TE operational way of doing things, and you had to have a little bit of NI to understand why they were changing, what the difference was and why it was supposed to be, quote unquote, the better way of doing it. um, so you had to kind of understand the essence of the numbers and the sort of underlying truth of the numbers in order to get the TE part of it, right? And so you would see all these posts on Facebook and all over social media with just these poor ISFJ and ESFJ moms just freaking out about core math because now you're changing their system, right? And they had to rely on NI to understand sort of the fundamentals of the change. Um, so just watch what happens when you sort of change things like that for the ISFJ or the ESFJ. Don't touch their TV, don't touch their stove. Like, they know how to work it. They don't need anything, more complicated usually. Um, Okay, so very, very frustrating, when they're put into the situation where the rules have changed and now they have to do things in a different way. Um, then the INTJs and the ENTJs are somewhat similar to the INFJs and the ENFJs, where they're used to using their intuition, but instead of FE, they're used to using TE. And so now you're putting them in a situation where they have to use SI and FE, because that's their polar slash eighth functions. And this, to me, the best way of describing it is, INTJs and ENTJs, they do not like institutions, like institutions that are organized around people. Like, think of like religion or large companies or, large government bureaucracies, that kind of thing. Um, because, you know, I mean, they'll put up with it if they have to, but if they're put into a situation where they know that there's a better way of doing something, right? There's a better process, more efficient way of doing whatever it is, that they want to do in sort of their TE and I world. And then the boss comes along and says, nope, we can't do it because it's going to disrupt our culture, or that's not the way we do things around here. Yes, you might be right. And yes, your way might be better than the way we're doing it, but we don't want to rock the boat and disrupt our culture. And so we're just going to keep doing things the way that we've always done them. Right? Like, I can't imagine anything that would grind a ENTJ's gears more than that. And that's why I think ENTJs just cannot work for other people. Like, they have to be their own boss. Because when you tell them, we can't do your new crazy idea or sell your new crazy product or try out your new crazy sales method, that you came up with, just because that's just not the way we do things around here, and it's going to disrupt our culture, and we don't want to upset, everybody else here. That's just going to drive them nuts, right? And so that's why I think they typically don't like organizations, and they don't like bureaucracy in the same way INFJs do, or don't like bureaucracy. But we get frustrated because our FE is rendered powerless, right? That, like, we're just operating against this computer that won't let us do what we fundamentally wanted, that we know we should be able to do, but the stupid computer, the stupid rules are telling us no, we can't do it. Where with the INTJ and the ENTJ, like, they have a fundamental understanding of the world that is inconsistent with the rules, but they're being told they can't do it because it's going to upset the culture or it's going to upset other people, right? and they're just like, why do I care about what other people think? Like it's obvious, that we're going to make more money or do things better if we just did it my way. Um, so that's very frustrating for them. So with all of the, I think I covered all of the J's. So their issues again are going to be where they're trying to accomplish something and their knowledge base is off. It's either they're used to doing it a particular way, they've always done it that way, it's always been done that way hundreds of years, and now all of a sudden there's this new way of having to do it, and they have to use NI to figure out what the new pattern is or the new rules. Um, and then the opposite are the NJs, where they are frustrated because they know that they should be able to do whatever it is they want to do, but the system is keeping them from being able to do it. Right? They've got a better idea about it, and it's denying sort of their fundamental understanding or truth of the world, right? Their NI truth. Okay. So those are the J's. The P's, the perceivers, their frustration doesn't come, it's not so much off of sort of a knowledge issue. It's more of people telling them what to do, right? Like engage in some action that is inconsistent with their, either their extroverted intuition or their extroverted sensing. So with the ESTPs and the ISTPs, they're going to have extroverted sensing, and they're always on the go, right? Especially the ESTPs, just move, 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 just always doing things. And the ISTPs, they're always doing things, but they're a little bit more relaxed about it, right? So, and so when they're put into a situation where they have to use any, or they're being forced to use any, and FI, introverted feeling, extroverted intuition, that's when they're going to get the most frustrated. And I think of it as basically politics, right? Like if they're forced into politics, um, or political sort of discourse, or they're forced to sort of you know elaborate or think about or discuss their opinion on something, that's going to be frustrating. And so the best example I can think of is, there are a bunch of videos going around where there's this global phenomenon of environmental protesters who are protesting, you know, oil, the use of oil, right? And so what they're doing, and I'm sure everybody's seen a video or two of this, is they're blocking traffic, right, by just slowly marching down the street holding their signs, right? And they're not saying anything or doing anything. They're just slowly walking down the street, or they might just decide to sit down in the middle of the street and block traffic. And yeah, and of course they're doing it to raise awareness for their cause. Of course they're trying to, get people to notice and all that kind of stuff. But I think another part of it is, they want people sitting in their car thinking about the environmental impact that they have by driving, and sitting there and thinking, maybe I should ride my bike to work, or maybe I should drive less. Maybe they're right. Now, are they successful? Probably not. But, that's probably part of their motivation, right? So then you see the videos of, usually it's a guy, but sometimes it's a lady getting out of their car and just picking up and dragging the protesters off the street and throwing them onto the sidewalk. Those are your ESTPs. Like, I would almost guarantee you, by the person, they are ESTPs. And one of the reasons, because everybody's frustrated, right? Everybody who's held up in traffic is frustrated. But these people reach like blinding white balls of rage kind of frustration. And it's because you're telling an SP that they can't do their go, 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 whatever it is that they're out trying to do. And you're sitting there forcing them into this political discussion, right? Or this political theater, right? And they're just like, I'm FI polar. I don't care about whatever this environmental issue is. And if I do care, it's at a very, very, low, very basic level. Um, and not only that, but you're forcing me into the theater or the conversation or the NE part of it, of, thinking about all the, environmental catastrophe and blah, blah, blah. And so when they're forced into this situation of, FINE kind of theater, it's just absolutely frustrating to them, right? Because they don't understand why you're preventing them from doing what they want. The protesters are trying to engage everybody into this big political conversation, or into thinking about the ramifications on the environment that all these cars are having, and the ESTPs want nothing to do with that. And when you're forcing them to engage in your political discourse, they are going to turn into a white ball of rage. Now the ISTPs, they're not FI polar, but they got FI sitting down there in the A spot, so they can understand the argument. But the way I think of ISTPs, I've got a good friend who's an ISTP, and he's a minority, and so take that for what it's worth, because he gets so, I never see him frustrated, but when he does get frustrated, it's when it's about political types of things, where people want to, well, his reaction is like, I don't understand why everybody needs to talk about it and put it in everybody's face all the time. Why don't you just be cool, right? Like, why don't you just live your life and get along with everybody from every background, because that's what I do, right? Like, he takes his FI and he uses SE to just be cool, right? Like, he doesn't need to talk to anybody. He doesn't need to put it in anybody's face. There's no any, part in, again, they're any polar, the ISTPs. And so they don't see the necessity of just, talking about it, right? It's like, just everybody should just get along and be cool. Right? Just a very ISTP kind of way. And I can't say he's wrong. So so I never see him get frustrated, except when he's talking, when things like that come up. And and similarly, he's an artist, and he's lots of things, because he's an ISTP, but one of the things he is an artist, and he's also a musician. And we were talking about sort of art critics and sort of the postmodern era of art and stuff like that, and how people think that there is no more art. It's all just discourse and discussion and theory and all this kind of stuff. And he's just like, that's just so stupid. Like, if you have an opinion about art, you need to just come up with your own song or make your own painting. Like, if like, if you want to express any sort of opinion about art, you need to do something. You need to create art or create a song. Don't just sit there and talk about it. And that is such an ISTP thing, right? And again, I could see him getting worked up over it, like actually like frustrated over it, which was interesting. Okay. So ESTPs, ISTPs, don't stop them from doing what they want to do with your silly little political arguments. They have no time for that. So let's look at their counterparts, the ESFPs, ISFPs. So same thing. They're kind of do, go, go, go. I want to do what I want to do. But their frustration comes when they're forced into a TINE situation. So instead of FINE, they don't want to be lectured on the logic behind things. So, for example, a couple of examples I've used before. Think of Dave Chappelle, Kanye West, Prince. Prince was probably an ISFP, if I had to guess. Um, but they all famously got into arguments with their record label or, you know, movie studio or television studio over their contract because they were wildly more successful than anybody expected them to be. And when it came time to sort of renew their contract or or renew their season or whatever, their put out new records, whatever the case may be, there was this immense pushback because the lawyers and the executives at the music studios and the TV studios were like, look, you're under contract. Here's what the contract says. It's all terms and conditions, just TI, logic, 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 right? You signed the contract. This is the way we do our business. And there's a very logical reason that we have to do it because, only 20% of the artists that we sign are ever going to be successful. And they need to pay for the 80% that never make any money, right? And so, yes, we understand that you've made way more money than anybody expected you to, and you've been way more successful than we expected when we signed you. But you have to understand, we sign hundreds of people with the expectation that 20 of them are going to be successful and make enough money to cover all the other 80, right? So that's a very TI sort of logical argument, and they're like, no, no. That just doesn't jive with their FI, right? That doesn't jive with their values. They're thinking, hey, look, you're making all this money off me, and it's my work, it's my creativity, and I should be making way more than what you're offering me or what you're giving me. And they're not going to be convinced by your TI explanation of things, your TINE explanation. And you can try all you want of like, use your NE to, understand how this all, like what would happen if we did it the way you want to do it, right? Like it will literally destroy the business model. We can't just give everybody who's successful 90%, because then we have no studio. We have, it's just the way the business works mathematically. And if it weren't for us, you wouldn't have a TV show. You wouldn't have all these record sales. Like we had to put that money behind you to get you there. And now that you're there, you have to sort of share some of that with us so that we can sustain our business. No, no, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. It's my stuff, and you're stealing from me, and you don't need that much money. And if 80% of your acts fail, that's on you. That's not on me. Right? Very FI kind of reaction, right? You see it with like a lot of athletes too. A lot of athletes are probably SFs, either ESFPs or ISFPs. Kyrie Irving comes to mind. Like he's always got some sort of FI moral quandary with the way the business is being run, and they might be right. I'm definitely not trying to say that they're right or wrong, but what they certainly don't want is somebody lecturing them on the TI logic behind it and trying to convince them on purely TINE grounds, because to them they're making their decision on that FISE. Like I'm just going to keep doing what I like to do, and I'm not going to listen to your TI arguments. So that and so they get really frustrated. Another example would be Joe Rogan. he's always, anytime he talks about things that frustrate him, it's because people are trying to give him some argument of, why he can't do something that he wants to do, right? Or why somebody else can't do what they want to do, right? Because there's some sort of contract or some sort of, business TI type reason behind it. And, if he's TI polar, he's just not, like that kind of argument's just not going to register or resonate with him. Okay, so those are the SPs. So now we have the NPs. So let's INFP, ENFP. So the INFPs, ENFPs, they're going to have a issue where you put them into a situation where they have to use SE and TI, right? So TI polar for ENFP, SE polar for INFP. And sort of a similar situation, except they don't want to be told, that they need to do something just because it's the logical thing to do, right? And it can get real frustrating where, especially with like an INFP, they understand what you're telling them. Like I mentioned before, I've got this friend who just always, she's an INFP and she always has one disaster after another. It's rarely her fault, but just for whatever reason, she's sort of like this Charlie Brown, like just things just keep happening to her. And I would try to give her some like TI advice, like, maybe you should change your job, or maybe you should do this, or, very TI kind of just, if this, then maybe this will happen, kind of a logical argument. And she understands it. She just doesn't want to do it. Right? She just doesn't have that SE kind of push. And so she's not going to do things just, she has a hard enough time doing things that she wants to do. She's not going to do things just because it's the logical thing to do, or at least, what you claim to be the logical thing. ENFPs are sort of the same way, except, they're TI polar. And so they're just not going to buy the argument. Again, I think TI polar types like ENFP, when you try to give them sort of the logical argument behind something, like why you should do this based off of conditional type logic, often their response is just, well, that's your opinion. That's, you might be right, but that's just your opinion. It's not necessarily a logical conclusion that I should do this. And so, they can still do things on the TE level. They'll do what works. But if you're trying to convince them, to do something else, just, purely off of some sort of logical argument, again, like this is what the contract says, so you have to do it, right? Contracts are very TI in that way. It's all just terms and conditions. And because the contract says you have to do it, you have to do it. No, I don't. That's just your argument. That's just your opinion. I don't feel like doing it. So I will come up with some reason or some, reason I don't have to. That's the INFP and the ENFP when faced with TI and SE. Last batch is the ENTP, INTP. So their issue, frustration, is going to come up when you have a mix of an FI and SE issue, right? And so instead of getting frustrated when you give them a logical argument of why they should do something, like the INFPs and the ENFPs do, they get frustrated when you try to tell them that it's best for them, right? And this is actually, and I get this directly from Eric's video, where he's an ENTP and he's like, just don't tell me what to do, because or what's good for me, because I'm FI polar and I don't even know what's good for me. And so how are you going to know what's good for me? That's such an ENTP reaction. And I have a very good friend who's an ENTP. I've known him, since high school for 30 years. And all of us who have known him over the years, we all know that like the fundamental rule about him is nobody can tell him what to do. Nobody. Like even in high school, like principals, teachers, like if he wanted to do something, nobody could tell him that he couldn't do it. Right now, that doesn't sound very FI polar, right? Because it's sort of what he wants to do, but it was in this kind of childish way, right? Where he would decide at a very basic level, I either like this or I don't like it. And you're not going to convince me to think about it any more than that. Right. And so I like doing this, and I'm not going to sit here and try to parse out and use my FI about whether or not this is actually something that's good for me and do some sort of cost benefit value based judgment. I've made my judgment at probably a very subconscious level that I like this or I don't like this. And no matter how much convincing you tried to give me that, I would be better off if I just sort of sucked it up, held my nose, and ate my broccoli or whatever, did something that I don't want to do, I'm not going to do it. Like just flat out, I'm not going to do it. Like if he worked at a job that he didn't like, he was gone. Even when people are trying to convince him who aren't FI polar, look, that's, think about it, right? Like that's a very valuable job. You could use the money, let's use a little bit of FI here to think of, the value of what you're giving up or what you don't want to do, and maybe just kind of suck it up and nope, nope, doesn't want to do it. It isn't even going to think about it, right? So to me, that's sort of the classic ENTP, where yeah, they're making a quick decision based off of some sort of FI value, but they're not engaging in it in a deep, meaningful way, and so they just will sort of just go off of their initial reaction without thinking of the cost benefit of it. So hopefully that makes sense. INTP, they're sort of like the INFP, where they're polar SE, and they don't want you again lecturing them on what they should be doing based off of some sort of FI value based judgment, right? Like they are going to do what they think is the most logical thing, and not necessarily want to sit there and parse through the cost benefit analysis on an FI level, right? Like what's the value to me of doing this? And again, that's why I always think of the INTPs as like the smart kids who didn't apply themselves, right? Like we all knew the kid in high school that got like a perfect score on the ACT or whatever, but like could barely, scrape by and get a C, in all their classes because they didn't want to do the homework. They didn't want to, do whatever it was that all the SJ kids were doing, because they didn't see the value in it, right? Like they're overthinking it. And everybody else kind of like they'll just hold their nose and do things that they don't want to do because to them there's at least some FI value to it, right? I don't like it, but I do see the value in doing it. The INTPs and the ENTPs, nope. If they don't immediately see the value of it, or if they don't have sort of a logical reason for wanting to do it, they're just not going to do it, right? They're going to be, again, the kids that just don't apply themselves often, and that's when you just have to get them behind a computer or something and just have them invent the internet or whatever. They don't care about the C's. or barely passing, because they don't register on that FI level, right? They're not thinking like, "Ooh, I really want an A because it makes me feel good." There's like, if I get an A or a C, it makes no difference. Like I feel the same way, right? If you're FI polar, right? And so because you don't see the value in getting an A, um, compared to just getting a C, which is just enough to get your degree and graduate and do what you want to do, um, you know, like you're not going to convince them otherwise, right? Um, and unfortunately, and with a lot of teachers, and my mom was a teacher and she had a lot of these students, but unfortunately, it's like it's so hard to convince them, like, look, there is a value in getting an A. There is a value in going to college. There is a value. No, no, no. I don't see the value in it. I'm not doing it, And again, it's very INTP, very ENTP, where their FI is just sort of either hanging out in polar or down at the bottom. ESTP, just quickly, ESTPs are a little different, even though they're FI polar, um, because they just have that SE go, 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 and they just want to win, right? Um, and so they're just driven by that SE, like I got to get out there and win. Um, and so even though they might be FI polar and they might not see the value of getting an A versus getting a C, um, they do on a very TI level understand, well, I need to get enough so I can make enough money so I can buy the Lamborghini, right? Or buy the apartment in Miami Beach or whatever, the ESTP wants. So their FI polar is a little different. I going on a tangent here, but it just made me think of that. Okay, that's all the types. That's what pisses us all off. That's what grinds our gears. Let me know if you have any examples. Love to hear from you. And talk to you next time. Thanks.